I didn't believe it at first. A food preservation trick that's over 2,000 years old, still working today? It sounded like one of those exaggerated survival myths. But then I realized, if this ancient method really does hold up, it could change the way we think about food security, storage, and even survival in times of crisis. So I decided to test it myself. No shortcuts, no modern gadgets. Just the same technique people used centuries ago. And what I discovered was far more shocking than I expected. Throughout history, food preservation wasn't just about convenience. It was about survival. Imagine living in a world without refrigerators, freezers, or vacuum sealers. If you couldn't keep food from spoiling, you risk hunger, disease, or even death. That's why ancient civilizations, from the Romans to the Chinese, developed ingenious methods to stretch the life of their harvests. One of the most fascinating techniques is fermentation and salt preservation combined. Archaeological records show that people stored vegetables, fish, and even meat in clay jars, layered with salt, submerged in brine, or sealed with fat. This wasn't just about taste. It was a chemical shield against bacteria. Salt pulled moisture out. Brine created an oxygen-poor environment, and fermentation introduced beneficial microbes that fought off harmful ones. Fast forward 2,000 years, and we still use versions of this trick. Pickles, kimchi, salted fish, cured meats, all descendants of this ancient preservation system. But here's the real question. Does it still work if we strip away modern conveniences? Could you, right now, preserve food the same way someone did in 180 and trust it to last? That's what I set out to test. Because if this method truly holds up, it means we've been sitting on a survival skill that's not only timeless, but potentially life-saving in emergencies. And if it fails, well, then we'll know which myths belong in history books, not in our kitchens. I started with a simple challenge. Preserve fresh vegetables using nothing but salt, water, and a clay jar. No fridge, no plastic wrap, no electricity. Just the raw method that ancient farmers relied on. First, I gathered my supplies. A batch of cucumbers, firm, fresh, and straight from the market. Coarse salt, the kind that crunches between your fingers. Clean water, boiled to remove impurities. And a clay jar, unglazed, porous, the kind that breathes just enough to mimic the vessels used centuries ago. As I laid everything out, doubts crept in. Would this actually work? Would the cucumbers rot within days, leaving me with a foul mess? Or would they transform into something edible, maybe even delicious? I couldn't shake the thought. People back then didn't have a backup plan. If this failed, they starved. For me, it was just an experiment. For them, it was survival. I layered the cucumbers inside the jar, sprinkling salt generously, then pour the brine until everything was submerged. The jar sealed with simple cloth and tied with twine. No airtight lids, no fancy equipment, just patience. And then came the waiting game. Days stretched into weeks. Every morning, I checked the jar, half expecting to see mold or decay. But instead, something unexpected began to happen by day 3. Bubbles appeared in the brine, tiny streams rising to the surface, like the jar was alive. Fermentation had begun. The salt and water created the perfect environment for lactic acid bacteria to thrive, slowly transforming the cucumbers. The smell shifted from raw vegetable to something tangy, sharp, almost appetizing. By day 7, the brine had turned cloudy. I worried, was this contamination? But then I remembered. Cloudiness is a natural sign of fermentation. The bacteria were doing their job, breaking down sugars, producing acids, and creating a hostile environment for spoilage organisms. By day 14, I tasted one. Crunchy, sour, salty, with a depth of flavor that felt ancient. It wasn't just preserved, it was transformed. The cucumber had become a pickle, not through modern recipes, but through the same process people used 2 millennia ago. The real test, though, was longevity. Could these pickles last beyond a few weeks? I left the jar untouched for another month. No refrigeration, no intervention, just clay, salt, and time. When I finally opened it, I braced myself for disaster. But what I found was astonishing. Instead of rot, the cucumbers had stabilized. The brine was strong, the flavor even richer, and the texture still crisp. They hadn't spoiled, they had matured. This wasn't just preservation. It was enhancement. But here's the twist. Not everything went perfectly. A second jar, where I had skimped on salt, turned into a disaster. The cucumbers softened, mold crept across the surface, and the smell was unbearable. It was a stark reminder that precision mattered. Ancient people weren't just tossing food into jars. They had rules, ratios, and traditions passed down through generations. Too little salt, and the system collapses. Too much, and the food becomes inedible. Balance was everything. This dual outcome shocked me. On one hand, the method worked flawlessly when done right. On the other, it failed spectacularly when done wrong. And that's exactly why it survived for thousands of years. Because when mastered, it was reliable. When neglected, it taught harsh lessons. The unexpected moment wasn't just that the food lasted. It was that the method demanded respect. It wasn't a casual trick. It was a discipline, a science hidden inside tradition. So, does a 2,000-year-old trick still work? Absolutely. The jar with proper salt ratios produced preserved cucumbers that lasted for weeks without refrigeration. They were safe, edible, and even delicious. The failed jar proved the opposite. Without care, the method collapses. Expectation versus reality? I expected either total failure or bland survival food. Instead, I discovered a preservation system that not only kept food safe, but elevated it into something flavorful. The reality was richer, more complex, and more demanding than I imagined. This ancient preservation trick isn't just a relic, it's a living skill. It works, but only if you respect the process. Salt, brine, and time are powerful tools, but they require precision. Too little salt, and bacteria win. Too much, and you ruin the food. Get it right, and you unlock a preservation method that has sustained civilizations for centuries. Who should use it? Anyone interested in preparedness, self-sufficiency, or simply exploring food history. In times of crisis, power outages, supply chain breakdowns, or survival scenarios, this method can mean the difference between waste and nourishment. And even in everyday life, it offers a way to connect with tradition, reduce reliance on modern technology, and enjoy flavors that are both ancient and timeless. The verdict is clear. This 2,000-year-old trick still works. Not as a gimmick, but as a proven, reliable system. It's a reminder that sometimes the old ways aren't outdated. They're just waiting to be rediscovered. If you've ever wondered how people survived before refrigerators, this experiment shows the answer. They didn't just scrape by. They thrived, using methods that were simple yet powerful. And the fact that this trick still works today proves that survival skills aren't locked in history books. They're alive, waiting for us to relearn them. For me, this wasn't just about cucumbers. It was about realizing that resilience doesn't always come from new technology. Sometimes, it comes from remembering what worked centuries ago. And if you're curious about more real tests like this, methods that challenge myths, prove survival skills, and connect us to the past, stick around. Because next time, I'm testing something even crazier. A preservation method that claims to keep meat safe without refrigeration for months. Until then, remember, survival isn't about panic. It's about preparation. And sometimes, the best preparation is hidden in the oldest traditions.